Kale the war beast broke formation in front of the entire crowd, and nobody could stop what happened next. Lyra Hollis felt the ground shake before she understood why. She was standing at the edge of the market square, a bundle of firewood strapped to her back, when the crowd around her began to scream and scatter. She turned, expecting a fight or a runaway cart, and instead saw the largest wolf she had ever seen charging straight toward her. She did not have time to run. She barely had time to breathe. The beast known as Kale, the Alpha King's personal war beast, feared across every pack territory for the men he had torn apart in battle, skidded to a stop just a few feet from her. Then, in front of hundreds of stunned onlookers, he lowered his massive body to the ground and bowed his head at her feet. The square went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Lyra stood frozen, her heart slamming against her ribs, staring down at the creature that guards spoke of in hushed, frightened voices. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. Kale did not bow to kings. Kale did not bow to anyone but the Alpha himself, and even then, only out of loyalty, never submission. Yet here he was, pressed low to the dirt in front of a poor human girl nobody in this pack even bothered to learn the name of. Somewhere behind her, a woman gasped. A child began to cry. And then came the voice that made her blood run cold. Kale, stand down. Alpha King Draven Ashgrave stepped through the parting crowd like a blade cutting through cloth. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark battle leathers, with a crimson sash across his chest, marking his rank. His eyes, sharp and pale gold, moved from his war beast to the girl kneeling in fear before him, and something dangerous flickered across his face. Kale did not move. I said stand down, Draven repeated, his voice low and hard enough to make the guards around him flinch. Still, the beast did not obey. Instead, he shifted his massive body slightly, placing himself between Draven and Lyra, as though guarding her from his own master. A low, protective growl rumbled from his chest, aimed not at Lyra, but at anyone who dared to come near her. Lyra's mind raced. She had lived her whole life on the edges of Blackthorn Pack territory, tolerated because her mother had once done the healers a great service, but never accepted. She sold firewood and mended torn clothes for coins that barely fed her. She kept her head down. She did not speak unless spoken to. She had learned, the hard way, that drawing attention to herself only invited trouble. And now the entire pack was staring at her, as though she had summoned a demon. Seize her, barked one of the guards, a broad-shouldered man named Garrick, who had never once looked Lyra in the eye before today. Two other guards moved forward, hands reaching for her arms. Kale's growl deepened into something closer to a roar. He snapped his massive jaws in their direction, forcing the guards to stumble backward. The message was clear. Anyone who touched Lyra would answer to him. Enough. Draven's voice cracked through the square like thunder. The guards froze in place. Even the crowd seemed to hold its breath. Draven walked closer, slow and deliberate, his gaze locked on Lyra. She could feel the weight of his stare pressing down on her like a physical force. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had imagined, though she had never allowed herself to imagine him at all. The Alpha King was not someone poor girls like her were supposed to think about, let alone stand this close to. "Who are you?" he asked. His tone was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, like a blade hidden inside velvet. "Lyra," she managed to say. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "Lyra Hollis, my lord." Hollis. He repeated the name slowly, as though testing it, searching his memory for a reason it should matter. It did not seem to bring him any answers, and that frustrated him more than if it had. "I have never seen you before in my life, yet my war beast, who has never disobeyed a single command from me since the day he was bonded to me as a pup, just broke rank in front of half the pack to protect you. Explain that to me." "I don't know," Lyra said honestly. "I have never seen him before either, I swear it." Draven's jaw tightened. He did not look like a man who believed in coincidences, and Lyra could not blame him. Nothing about this moment made sense to her either. She had spent her whole life being invisible, and now, in the span of a few terrifying seconds, she had become the center of everyone's attention, and not in a good way. Kale, still pressed low to the ground, turned his large head toward Lyra and looked up at her with an expression that seemed almost pleading. It was strange, seeing such raw emotion in the eyes of a beast known for battle and bloodshed. There was something familiar in the way he looked at her, though she could not place why. "Bring her to the stronghold," Draven finally said, straightening. Quietly. "No chains, no rough handling. Just bring her." Rurik, the Alpha's beta and second in command, pushed his way through the crowd, his expression twisted with suspicion. He was a stocky man, with a jagged scar running down one side of his face, and he had never trusted anything he could not explain with a sword. "My lord, this could be witchcraft," Rurik said. "A spell to control the beast. We should not bring danger into our own walls." "If it is witchcraft," Draven said without looking at him, "then I want to understand it before it becomes a threat to this pack. And if it is something else," his eyes flicked briefly back to Lyra, "then I want to understand that too." Lyra swallowed hard. She thought about running. For one wild moment, she pictured herself bolting through the crowd, disappearing into the forest paths she knew better than anyone, vanishing before anyone could stop her. But Kale was still beside her, refusing to move, and something told her that running would only make things worse. Worse for her, and perhaps worse for the massive creature who seemed determined not to leave her side. "Please," she said quietly, mostly to herself, though Draven heard her. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then you have nothing to fear," Draven answered, though his tone did not sound entirely convinced of his own words. As the guards escorted her through the crowd, whispers followed her like a swarm of bees. She caught fragments of conversation, cruel and curious in equal measure. "That's the firewood girl. Her mother was strange too, remember? Kept to herself. Never explained where she came from. Maybe she really is a witch." The Alpha's beast never bows to anyone. Never. Lyra kept her eyes forward, refusing to let the whispers show on her face, though inside, her chest felt tight with fear. She thought of her mother, who had died 3 winters ago, leaving her alone, in a small cabin at the edge of the woods. Her mother had never spoken much about her past, only warning Lyra, again and again, in a voice heavy with something like grief, to never trust the wolves of this pack, no matter how kind they seemed. Lyra had never understood what she meant. Now, walking toward the towering stone stronghold of the Alpha King, with a legendary war beast at her heels, she began to wonder if her mother had been trying to protect her from exactly this moment. Kale walked close beside her the entire way, his massive shoulder nearly brushing against her arm, as though shielding her from the stares and whispers of the crowd. Every so often, he glanced up at her, and each time, Lyra felt an odd pull in her chest, like a memory trying to surface from somewhere she could not reach. The stronghold loomed ahead, its dark stone walls rising high above the trees, banners bearing the Ashgrave crest snapping in the wind. Lyra had seen it from a distance many times, but she had never imagined she would walk through its gates, and certainly not like this, surrounded by armed guards, trailed by whispers, and shadowed by a beast that refused to leave her. As they crossed the threshold into the stronghold courtyard, Lyra glanced back one final time at the crowd gathered outside the gates. Among the sea of unfamiliar faces, she caught sight of an old woman standing perfectly still, watching her with an expression that was not fear, or suspicion, or curiosity. It was recognition. The old woman's lips moved, though no sound reached Lyra over the noise of the crowd, and then the gates closed behind her, cutting off the outside world completely. Lyra stood in the courtyard, surrounded by the walls of a pack that had never accepted her, held together by a mystery she did not understand, protected by a beast who should have feared no one but his king. Whatever was happening to her, whatever strange force had brought Kale to his knees, before a poor girl nobody had ever cared to notice, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life would never be the same again. Draven watched her from across the courtyard, arms crossed, his golden eyes narrowed in thought. Kale settled himself protectively beside Lyra, refusing every order to move away from her side, and for the first time in years, the Alpha King found himself facing a puzzle he could not immediately solve. "Take her to the West Chamber," he finally ordered, his voice quieter now, contemplative. "And someone find Mother Yarrow. If anyone in this pack knows what is happening here, it will be her." As the guards led Lyra deeper into the stronghold, Kale padded silently at her side, his loyalty unshaken, his purpose, suddenly, inexplicably, tied to the poor girl who had spent her whole life being invisible. Behind them, Draven remained standing in the courtyard long after they had disappeared from view, staring at the spot where his war beast had bowed, turning over a single question in his mind that refused to leave him alone. Who was Lyra Hollis, and why did his beast know her when he himself did not? The west chamber was colder than Lyra expected, its stone walls bare except for a single narrow window that let in a thin blade of afternoon light. She sat on the edge of a wooden bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Kale lay stretched across the floor near the door, his golden eyes tracking every guard who passed outside. She had been waiting for what felt like hours, though it was probably closer to one. Every creak of the hallway made her flinch. Every set of footsteps made her wonder if this was the moment they decided she was too dangerous to keep alive. When the door finally opened, it was not the guards who entered first, but Draven himself, followed by an old woman with silver hair braided down her back and sharp, searching eyes. Lyra recognized her immediately as the woman from the crowd earlier, the one who had looked at her with recognition instead of fear. "This is Mother Yarrow," Draven said, closing the door behind them. "She has served this pack as healer and seer for longer than I have been alive. If there is an explanation for what happened today, she will know it." Mother Yarrow did not sit. She approached Lyra slowly, studying her face with an intensity that made Lyra want to look away, though something in her refused to. Kale lifted his head and watched the old woman carefully, but he did not growl or move to block her path, which Lyra took as a small sign of reassurance. "Give me your hand, child," Mother Yarrow said gently. Lyra hesitated, glancing at Draven, who gave a small, impatient nod. She extended her hand, and the old woman turned it over carefully, running a thumb across the inside of her wrist, where a faint, curved birthmark had rested for as long as Lyra could remember. She had always kept it hidden beneath long sleeves, a habit so old she barely thought about it anymore. Mother Yarrow's breath caught. Her eyes lifted to meet Lyra's, and for a moment, the old woman looked almost afraid. "Where did you get this mark?" she asked quietly. "I was born with it," Lyra said. "My mother told me to always keep it covered. She never explained why." "What was your mother's name?" "Ren. Ren Hollis." Mother Yarrow's grip tightened slightly around Lyra's wrist. She turned to Draven, her expression unreadable, though something in the set of her shoulders had changed, as though she were bracing herself for a difficult conversation. "My lord," she said carefully, "I need to speak with you privately." "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of her," Draven replied. "She is at the center of this, whether she understands it or not." Mother Yarrow studied Lyra for another long moment, then sighed and released her hand. "This mark," she said, "is not just a birthmark. It is a sigil, a very old one, tied to a bloodline that everyone in this pack believed was gone. I have not seen it in over 20 years. "What bloodline?" Draven asked, though there was something guarded in his voice now, as though part of him already suspected the answer, and did not want to hear it confirmed. Mother Yarrow hesitated, glancing between Draven and Lyra, as though weighing how much truth the rune could hold. "The Ashgrave royal line was not always unbroken," she said slowly. "Before your father took the throne, there was another branch of the family. Cousins, distant but true bloodline all the same. They were driven out during a struggle for power many years ago. It was said none of them survived." Draven's expression darkened. "You are telling me this girl is somehow connected to my own family?" "I am telling you," Mother Yarrow said, "that the mark on her wrist belongs to that lost branch. If her mother's name was truly Ren, and if she carried this mark from birth, then it is very possible that Lyra is a descendant of that bloodline. A bloodline your own beast may recognize on some instinctive level, even if neither of you understand why." The room fell silent. Lyra stared down at her wrist, at the faint curved mark she had spent her entire life hiding, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. A royal bloodline. A connection to the Alpha King's own family. It felt impossible, like a story meant for someone else's life, not the poor firewood girl who had spent years being ignored by everyone around her. "That's not possible," she said quietly. "My mother never told me anything like this. We were poor. We had nothing. If we were part of some royal bloodline, why would we live the way we did?" "Perhaps because your mother knew what happened to the others who carried that blood," Mother Yarrow said gently. "Perhaps she hid you to keep you alive." Draven paced slowly across the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression tight with thought. Lyra could see the tension building in him, the careful calculation of a leader trying to understand a threat, or perhaps something more complicated than a threat. If this is true, he said finally, then Kale's behavior makes a strange kind of sense. War beasts bonded to royal bloodlines are known to sense kinship, even across generations. Even when the connection is faint, it is instinct, not choice. Are you saying he thinks I'm... Lyra could not finish the sentence. It felt too large, too strange to say out loud. I am saying, Draven said, turning to face her directly, that my beast recognized something in your blood today, that I did not, and that Mother Yarrow's explanation is the only one that fits what happened in that square. Kale, as though sensing the conversation had turned back to him, rose from his spot near the door and moved closer to Lyra, resting his large head gently against her knee. She reached down instinctively, running her fingers through the thick fur at his neck, and felt him relax beneath her touch. Rurik's voice suddenly cut through the tension as he pushed the chamber door open, without waiting for permission, his expression hard. My lord, forgive the interruption, he said, but word is already spreading through the pack about what happened in the square. People are asking questions. Some are afraid. Others, he glanced at Lyra with open suspicion, are wondering if this girl is a threat that needs to be dealt with before it grows into something larger. No one touches her, Draven said sharply, his voice leaving no room for argument. Not until we understand exactly what we are dealing with. Rurik's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, only casting one last wary glance at Lyra before retreating from the room. Mother Yarrow watched the exchange carefully, then turned back to Lyra with a softer expression than before. Whatever you are, child, she said, whatever blood runs through you, you are not alone in this anymore. That mark connects you to something larger than yourself, and like it or not, that means people will want to understand it, and some may want to use it. Lyra felt a chill settle over her, despite the warmth of Kale's body, pressed against her leg. She had come into this stronghold as a poor, invisible girl caught in a strange and frightening accident. Now she was leaving this conversation as something else entirely, something with a name and a history she had never known existed, tied to the very family that ruled over the life she had always lived on the outside of. What happens now? She asked quietly. Draven studied her for a long moment before answering, his golden eyes unreadable. Now, he said, you stay here, under my protection, until we understand exactly what your blood means for this pack, and for me. Mother Yarrow will search the old records for anything more about your family, and you, his gaze flicked briefly to Kale, still resting faithfully at her side, will need to get used to having a war beast as your shadow, whether either of us understands why yet or not. Lyra looked down at Kale, who gazed back up at her with quiet, steady devotion, and for the first time since the chaos in the square, she felt something other than fear settle into her chest. It was small and fragile, and she did not fully trust it yet, but it was there all the same. It felt almost like hope. By the third day inside the stronghold, Lyra had learned that fear could take many shapes. It could be loud, like the shouting she heard from the training yards, where warriors sharpened their blades and their tempers in equal measure. It could be quiet too, hidden behind polite smiles from servants who clearly did not want her there, but dared not say so openly, not with Kale pacing at her heels wherever she went. She had not been allowed to leave the stronghold grounds since the day in the square. Draven had called it protection. Rurik called it something closer to a threat, though never to her face. She stayed in a small guest chamber near the west wing, and every meal, every walk through the halls, every quiet moment reading by candlelight, came with the constant, watchful presence of the massive war beast who refused to be more than a few steps away from her. It was strange how quickly she had grown used to him. In the beginning, his size alone had terrified her. The sheer power coiled beneath his dark fur, the way his jaws could snap a grown man's arm without effort. But Kale had never once shown her anything but gentleness. He rested his head in her lap while she sat by the fire. He nudged her hand when she seemed lost in worry. He watched over her while she slept, as though guarding something precious that only he understood the value of. On the morning of the fourth day, Draven summoned her to the great hall. The hall was larger than any room Lyra had ever stood in, its high ceiling supported by dark wooden beams, its walls lined with old banners bearing the crest of the Ashgrave line. Draven sat at the head of a long table, Rurik standing at his right side, Mother Yarrow seated near the far end, with several old, weathered books spread out before her. "Sit," Draven said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Lyra sat, and Chaol immediately settled beneath the table near her feet, his presence a quiet reassurance she had come to rely on more than she liked to admit. "Mother Yarrow has spent the last 3 days searching through the old pack records," Draven began. "What she found confirms what we suspected, and raises new questions we cannot ignore." Mother Yarrow cleared her throat, and lifted one of the older books, its leather cover cracked with age. "Nearly 30 years ago, before Draven's father secured full control of this pack, there was a rival branch of the Ashgrave family who challenged his claim to the throne. That conflict ended badly for the challengers. Most were killed in the fighting that followed. A few disappeared and were never found. Ren Hollis," Draven said, his voice carefully controlled, "your mother, was one of the names listed among those who vanished." Lyra's chest tightened. "You're saying my mother was involved in a fight for the throne?" "I am saying," Mother Yarrow corrected gently, "that your mother was likely born into that bloodline, and fled before the worst of the violence could reach her. If she was already carrying you, or gave birth to you shortly after fleeing, that would explain everything. Your mark, your mother's warnings, the life of hiding she chose for you both." Rurik, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice edged with hard suspicion. "With respect, my lord, this changes nothing about the danger she represents. If word spreads that a surviving heir from that old bloodline has appeared, it will not matter whether she wanted this or not. There are still families in this pack who lost everything in that conflict. Some will see her as a rallying point. Others will see her as a target. Either way, her presence here puts this pack at risk." "What would you have me do then?" Draven asked, his tone flat, though Lyra could sense the tension coiling beneath it. "Send her away? Pretend none of this happened?" "I would have you consider," Rurik said carefully, "that the safest path for this pack may not be the safest path for her. A quiet solution now prevents a much larger conflict later." The words hung in the air, and Lyra understood exactly what he meant, even though he had been careful not to say it directly. Her stomach turned cold. She glanced instinctively toward Draven, searching his face for some sign of how he intended to respond, and found herself surprised by the flash of anger that crossed his features. "No one touches her," Draven said again, his voice sharper this time, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "I have said this once already, and I will not repeat myself a third time. She did not choose this bloodline. She did not choose Chaol's loyalty. She is not a threat until she gives me a reason to believe otherwise." Rurik's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head slightly in reluctant acceptance, though his eyes lingered on Lyra with an expression that told her this conversation was far from finished in his mind. "There is something else," Mother Yarrow added quietly, drawing everyone's attention back to her. She turned another page in the old book, revealing a faded illustration of a sigil that matched the mark on Lyra's wrist almost exactly. This mark was not simply decorative. In the old records it is described as a bonding mark, one that formed a connection between certain bloodline members and the war beasts trained to serve them. If Lyra truly carries this bloodline, it would explain why Chaol responded to her the way he did. It was not witchcraft. It was recognition, buried deep in instinct passed down through generations. Lyra looked down at her own wrist, at the mark she had spent her whole life hiding beneath long sleeves, suddenly understanding it as something far larger than a simple birthmark. It was a piece of a history she had never known, connecting her to a bloodline of war and loss, to a beast who had somehow known her before she had ever known herself. "What does this mean for me now?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Draven studied her for a long moment before answering. "It means you will remain here, under my protection, while we determine exactly how much of this history is true, and what it means for the future of this pack. It means you will need to learn quickly, because ignorance will not protect you from the people who may see you as either a symbol or a threat." "And if I wanted to leave?" Lyra asked. "If I wanted no part of any of this?" Something flickered across Draven's expression, too quick for Lyra to name, gone before she could study it further. "Then I would tell you," he said, "that leaving now, without understanding what you carry, or who may already know about you, would be far more dangerous than staying here. Whether you wanted this bloodline or not, it has already found you. Running from it will not undo that." Lyra sat in silence, absorbing the weight of his words. She thought of her mother, who had spent years hiding her away from a truth this enormous, protecting her from a war that had started long before Lyra was born. She thought of the whispers in the square, the fear and suspicion in the eyes of people who had once simply ignored her. And she thought of Cale, resting quietly beneath the table, his loyalty rooted in something far deeper than choice. Whatever path lay ahead of her now, she understood one thing clearly. There was no simple way back to the quiet, invisible life she had once lived. That life had ended the moment Cale bowed before her in the square, and no amount of wishing could undo what had already been set into motion. As the meeting came to an end, and the others began to file out of the hall, Mother Yarrow lingered behind, placing a gentle hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Your mother loved you enough to give up everything to keep you safe," the old woman said quietly. "Whatever comes next, remember that her sacrifice gave you the chance to face this on your own terms, rather than being caught by surprise the way she once was. That is no small gift, even if it does not feel like one right now." Lyra nodded, though she could not yet find the words to respond. As Mother Yarrow left the hall, Lyra remained seated at the long table, Cale's steady presence beside her, the only thing keeping the fear in her chest from turning into panic. Outside the hall, the pack continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the full truth that had just been confirmed within those walls. But Lyra understood, with a heavy certainty settling deep in her stomach, that it would not stay hidden for long. Secrets this large had a way of finding the light eventually, and when this one did, she suspected the entire pack would be forced to choose a side. And she was not yet certain which side would choose her in return. Life inside the stronghold began to settle into an uneasy rhythm, though Lyra never quite let herself relax into it. Every morning, she woke to the sound of Cale shifting near the door of her chamber, always alert, always watching for anything that might threaten her. Every evening, she fell asleep to the distant sound of warriors training in the yard below her window, a reminder that she now lived inside walls built for war. Mother Yarrow visited her often during those first 2 weeks, bringing old books, faded scrolls, and fragments of stories about the lost branch of the Ashgrave bloodline. Slowly, piece by piece, Lyra began to understand more about the family she had never known she belonged to. "Your great-grandmother," Mother Yarrow explained one afternoon, sitting across from Lyra in the small chamber, a worn scroll spread between them, was known for her fairness. The old records say she believed the pack should be led with compassion, not fear. That belief made her popular among the common wolves, but dangerous to those who wanted power through force instead. "Is that why there was a fight over the throne?" Lyra asked. "In part," Mother Yarrow said. "Draven's grandfather believed strength alone should decide leadership. Your great-grandmother believed leadership should be earned through trust. The two philosophies could not coexist peacefully, and eventually, it led to violence." Lyra traced her fingers along the edge of the scroll, studying the faded illustration of a woman who looked strikingly similar to herself. The same sharp eyes, the same set jaw. "Do you think that's why Cale responded to me the way he did?" she asked. "Because of some old belief passed down through blood?" "I think," Mother Yarrow said carefully, "that war beasts like Cale are bonded not just to a person, but to a legacy. Whatever qualities your ancestors carried, whatever sense of loyalty or fairness lived in them, some trace of that may live in you as well, even if you never knew it existed until now." Their conversations continued in this way for days, slowly filling in the gaps of a history Lyra had never known to ask about. But learning about her bloodline was only part of her new reality. The other part, far more complicated, involved navigating a stronghold full of people who did not yet know what to make of her. The servants treated her with a careful, distant politeness, unsure whether she deserved respect or suspicion. The nobles who occasionally passed through the halls watched her with open curiosity, whispering behind gloved hands the moment she was out of earshot, and the young wolves training in the yard below her window sometimes shot glances up toward her chamber, clearly aware that something unusual was happening within the stronghold, even if they did not know the full truth. One afternoon, while walking through the stronghold gardens with Cale at her side, Lyra encountered a group of noble daughters gathered near a stone fountain, dressed in fine fabrics far beyond anything Lyra had ever owned. One of them, a sharp-eyed young woman named Isolde, stepped forward with a cool, appraising look. "So you're the girl everyone's been talking about," Isolde said, her tone light, but edged with something colder beneath it. The one who somehow charmed the Alpha's beast. I didn't charm anyone, Lyra said carefully. I don't even know why it happened. How convenient, Isolde replied, glancing at her companions, who giggled softly behind their hands. A poor girl, with no explanation for why she suddenly matters. It almost sounds like something out of an old story. Believe whatever you like, Lyra said, keeping her voice steady despite the discomfort twisting in her stomach. I'm not asking anyone to accept me. Good, Isolde said, stepping closer, her voice dropping lower, so only Lyra could hear. Because some of us have spent years working to be noticed by the Alpha. We won't simply step aside because his beast took a strange liking to a firewood girl. Kale, sensing the tension, moved subtly closer to Lyra's side, a low warning rumble building in his chest. Isolde's confident expression faltered slightly at the sound, and she took a small step back. Careful, Lyra said quietly. He doesn't like it when people threaten me. Isolde straightened, forcing her expression back into cool composure. This isn't over, she said, before turning and walking away, with her companions trailing behind her. Lyra let out a slow breath once they were gone, running a hand along Kale's back to steady herself. Thank you, she murmured. Kale pressed his head gently against her side in response, and for a moment, the tension of the encounter eased into something softer. That evening, during a rare quiet dinner in one of the smaller dining chambers, Draven joined her unexpectedly, taking a seat across the table without invitation. Lyra tensed slightly, unsure what to expect from him after weeks of careful, distant interactions. I heard about your conversation with Isolde, he said, studying her carefully. Word travels fast in this place, Lyra replied. It does, Draven agreed, especially when it involves anyone connected to me. Lyra set down her spoon, meeting his gaze directly. Is that what I am now, someone connected to you? Draven was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face, as though trying to solve a puzzle he had not expected to encounter. You are someone my beast chose to protect without my command. You are someone whose bloodline is tied to my own family's history. Whether either of us wanted that connection or not, it exists now, and pretending otherwise would be foolish. That's not really an answer, Lyra said. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched the corner of Draven's mouth. No, he admitted. It isn't. They sat in silence for a while after that, the tension between them shifting into something quieter, less guarded than their earlier conversations had been. Lyra found herself studying him in return, searching for the ruthless Alpha King the pack whispered about, and finding instead someone far more thoughtful, far more burdened by responsibility than she had expected. Why do you keep defending me? She asked eventually. Rurik wants me gone. Half the nobles in this stronghold look at me like I'm a threat. You could have handed me over the moment Mother Yarrow confirmed my bloodline. It would have been easier. Draven considered the question carefully before answering. Because easier is not always right, he said, and because Kale has never been wrong about anything in the years I have known him. If he believes you deserve protection, I am inclined to trust that instinct, even when I do not fully understand it myself. Lyra held his gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them that she did not yet have the words to name. Kale, resting quietly beside her chair, let out a soft, contented sigh, as though satisfied that the two people he had chosen to protect were finally beginning to understand each other. Outside the dining chamber, the stronghold continued its quiet nighttime routine, unaware of the small, fragile shift taking place within those walls. But Lyra could feel it clearly, a subtle change in the air between herself and the Alpha King, who had once seemed like nothing more than a distant, dangerous figure. Whatever came next in this strange new chapter of her life, she suspected it would not be simple. But for the first time since Kale had bowed before her in the square, she found herself facing the uncertainty ahead with something other than fear. She faced it, instead, with quiet, cautious hope. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened across Blackthorn territory, and with the changing season came a shift in the stronghold that Lyra could feel long before anyone explained it to her. Guards doubled their patrols along the outer walls. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room. Even Mother Yarrow, usually so calm and steady, seemed distracted during their afternoon lessons, glancing toward the windows more often than usual. Something's wrong, Lyra said one afternoon, setting down the scroll she had been studying. "Everyone's been on edge for days." Mother Yarrow hesitated before answering, which told Lyra more than words could have. "There have been rumors circulating among the border packs," she finally admitted. "Word of your bloodline has spread further than we hoped. Some see it as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" "To challenge Draven's rule," Mother Yarrow said quietly, "or to use you as a symbol against him, whether you want that role or not." Lyra felt a familiar chill settle over her, the same cold dread she had felt since the day Cale first bowed before her in the square. She had spent the last several weeks trying to adjust to life within the stronghold, trying to understand a bloodline she had never asked for, and now it seemed that understanding it was not going to be enough to keep her safe. That evening, as she made her way back to her chamber after a quiet dinner, Cale suddenly stiffened beside her, his ears pinning back, a low growl building deep in his throat. Lyra froze, her instincts sharpening in response to his sudden alertness. "What is it?" she whispered. Cale did not answer, of course, but his body angled protectively in front of hers, his golden eyes fixed on the darkened corridor ahead. Lyra strained to listen, and after a moment, she heard it too. The faint, deliberate sound of footsteps, moving too carefully to belong to an ordinary guard on routine patrol. Before she could react further, 3 figures emerged from the shadows ahead, their faces partially covered, their movements quick and coordinated, in a way that made her stomach drop with fear. Cale lunged forward instantly, placing himself directly between Lyra and the approaching threat, his powerful body a wall of muscle and fury. "Run," Cale's actions seemed to say, even without words, but Lyra found herself frozen, unable to force her legs to move, as the confrontation unfolded in front of her. The first attacker moved quickly, but Cale was faster, knocking him aside with a powerful swipe before he could get close. The second attacker attempted to circle around, clearly hoping to reach Lyra while Cale was occupied, but the massive warbeast twisted with surprising agility, cutting off the path before it could be completed. "Lyra, move!" a familiar voice shouted from further down the corridor. She turned to see Draven sprinting toward them, his expression fierce with alarm, his hand already reaching for the blade at his side. Relief flooded through her chest, quickly followed by a fresh wave of fear, as she realized the third attacker had used the distraction to slip past Cale's guard. Everything happened quickly after that. The attacker lunged toward her, and Cale, sensing the danger too late to fully intercept it, threw himself into the path at the last possible moment, taking a hard blow meant for Lyra instead. He let out a pained sound that cut straight through her, and she dropped to her knees beside him without thinking, her hands pressed against his side, where a deep wound had opened along his ribs. Draven reached them seconds later, quickly subduing the remaining attacker with practiced, controlled force, before turning his full attention to Lyra and the injured beast beside her. "He's hurt," Lyra said, her voice trembling, her hands already slick with Cale's blood. "He took the hit meant for me." Draven knelt quickly beside them, examining the wound with a grim, focused expression. "It's deep, but not fatal if we get him help quickly." He raised his voice, calling sharply for the guards who had finally arrived, ordering them to secure the attackers and summon Mother Yarrow immediately. As chaos erupted around them, guards restraining the surviving attackers, servants rushing to bring bandages and clean water, Lyra remained kneeling beside Cale, her hands pressed firmly against his wound, tears blurring her vision as she whispered soft, desperate reassurances to the beast, who had risked everything to protect her. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "You didn't have to take that hit for me." Cale's tail thumped weakly against the stone floor, a small, exhausted gesture of comfort, even in his pain, and something in Lyra's chest broke open at the sight of it. Draven watched the exchange in silence for a moment, before turning his attention to the captured attackers, his expression darkening into something far more dangerous than the calm control he usually maintained. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice low and lethal. One of the attackers, clearly injured and frightened, refused to speak, but the second, weaker in resolve, stammered out a fragmented confession under the weight of Draven's furious stare. "We were told the girl was a threat to the Pack's future. Told removing her quietly would prevent a larger conflict later." "Who told you this?" Draven pressed, his hand tightening around the man's collar. The attacker hesitated, glancing nervously toward the corridor where Rurik had just arrived, drawn by the commotion. For a brief, tense moment, Lyra saw something flicker across Rurik's expression, gone too quickly to fully name, but enough to plant a seed of suspicion that would not easily be uprooted. "I don't know his name," the attacker finally admitted. "Only that he served someone high within the pack's ranks. Someone who wanted this handled, before it grew any larger." Draven's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting briefly toward Rurik, before returning to the frightened attacker in his grip. "Take them to the holding cells," he ordered the guards. "I want a full account of everything they know by morning." As the attackers were dragged away, Mother Yarrow finally arrived, quickly kneeling beside Kale, to assess his wound, with practiced, steady hands. "He will heal," she said, after a careful examination, "but he needs rest, and time." Relief washed over Lyra so intensely that her hands began to shake. She remained kneeling beside Kale, as Mother Yarrow worked to clean and bind his wound, refusing to leave his side, even when Draven gently suggested she rest. "I'm not leaving him," she said firmly. "Not after what he just did for me." Draven studied her for a long moment, something unreadable shifting behind his golden eyes, before he nodded and settled onto the floor beside her without another word, remaining close as Mother Yarrow finished her work. Later that night, once Kale had been moved to a quiet chamber to rest, and the immediate chaos had settled, Draven found Lyra sitting alone beside the sleeping beast, her hand resting gently on his uninjured side. "You should rest," he said quietly, stepping into the room. "I keep thinking about what almost happened," Lyra admitted, not looking up. "If he hadn't moved when he did." "But he did," Draven said, moving to sit beside her. "And you're safe." "For now," Lyra said, finally lifting her gaze to meet his. "But someone in this stronghold wants me gone badly enough to send people to kill me. That doesn't just disappear because tonight failed." Draven's expression turned serious, the weight of responsibility settling visibly across his shoulders. "I will find out who is responsible," he said, "and I will make certain nothing like this happens again." "Why does this matter so much to you?" Lyra asked quietly. "A few weeks ago, I was just a stranger caught in a strange accident. Now you're sitting here at midnight, promising to protect me from your own people." Draven was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward Kale's sleeping form, before returning to her face. "Because somewhere between the accident and tonight," he said slowly, "you stopped being a stranger to me." The quiet admission hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them seemed prepared for. Lyra felt her heart quicken, uncertain how to respond to the unexpected honesty in his voice, uncertain what it meant for either of them moving forward. Kale shifted slightly in his sleep, a soft, contented sound escaping him, as though even in his injured rest, he sensed something important settling into place between the two people he had chosen to protect. Outside the chamber, the stronghold remained quiet, unaware of the danger that had unfolded within its walls that night, unaware of the growing bond forming between its Alpha King and the poor, overlooked girl whose bloodline had upended everything they thought they understood about the future of their pack. But within the walls of that quiet chamber, both Lyra and Draven understood, without needing to say it aloud, that whatever came next, they would face it together. The attack in the corridor changed everything about how the stronghold treated Lyra. Guards now escorted her wherever she went, even with Kale slowly recovering by her side. Draven personally reviewed every meal brought to her chamber, and Mother Yarrow moved her research into a locked room deep within the stronghold, determined to uncover the full truth of Lyra's bloodline before anyone else could use it against her. It was nearly a week after the attack when Mother Yarrow finally summoned Lyra and Draven together, her expression grave as she spread a collection of old documents across the table in her private study. "I found the full account," she said quietly, "of what happened 30 years ago, when the two branches of the Ashgrave family fought for control of this pack." Lyra sat down slowly, Kale settling protectively at her feet despite his still healing wound. Draven remained standing, his arms crossed, his expression carefully guarded, though Lyra could see the tension building in his shoulders as Mother Yarrow began to speak. "Your great-grandmother, the one who believed in leading through fairness rather than fear, had a daughter named Alara," Mother Yarrow explained. "Alara married outside the pack, to a quiet, gentle man, and together they had a daughter of their own, Ren." Lyra's breath caught. My mother. Yes, Mother Yarrow confirmed. When the conflict for the throne began, Ilara stood firmly against the branch of the family that wanted power through force. That branch was led by a man determined to secure control no matter the cost. Draven's jaw tightened visibly, though he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the old documents, as though bracing himself for what came next. The man who led that violent campaign, Mother Yarrow continued, her voice softening with something close to regret, was your father, Draven. The room fell into heavy silence. Lyra glanced between Mother Yarrow and Draven, watching as the weight of this revelation settled visibly across his features. His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides, though his voice remained carefully controlled when he finally spoke. My father built his rule on the deaths of her family, he said slowly, as though testing the truth of the words as he spoke them. Ilara was killed in the fighting, Mother Yarrow confirmed gently. Ren managed to escape with the help of loyal friends, though she lost nearly everything in doing so. She fled far from Blackthorn territory, carrying you not long after, determined to keep you hidden from a history that had already cost her everything. Lyra sat frozen, absorbing the full weight of what she had just learned. Her mother had not simply been a distant relative of some forgotten bloodline. She had been the daughter of a woman killed in a violent struggle for power, a struggle led by the father of the very man who now stood before her, the man whose war beast had thrown himself into danger to protect her, the man who had begun, slowly and carefully, to matter to her in ways she had not expected. You're the reason my family lost everything, Lyra said quietly, though there was no anger in her voice yet, only the slow, painful process of understanding. My father is the reason, Draven corrected, his voice tight with something that sounded almost like shame. But I carry the throne he built through that violence. I cannot separate myself from that history, no matter how much I might want to. Did you know, Lyra asked, meeting his gaze directly, about any of this before Mother Yarrow found it? No, Draven said firmly. I knew there had been conflict before my father secured his rule. I did not know the details. I did not know your family's name, or what happened to them, until Mother Yarrow brought us here today. Lyra studied his expression carefully, searching for any hint of deception, and found none. Whatever else Draven was, whatever burdens came with the crown he wore, he did not seem to be lying about his ignorance of this particular truth. This changes things, she said quietly. It doesn't have to change everything, Draven said, though his voice carried less certainty than usual. Doesn't it? Lyra asked. Your father destroyed my family to secure the throne you now sit on. If word of this spreads, if people understand that I'm not just distantly connected to some old bloodline, but the last remaining heir of the family your father tried to erase, what do you think happens next? Draven did not answer immediately, and his silence told her everything she needed to know. Whatever fragile trust had begun forming between them over the past several weeks now stood on far more complicated ground, tangled in a history neither of them had chosen, but both of them would now have to face. Mother Yarrow watched the exchange with quiet sympathy, though she did not attempt to soften the truth further. There is no version of this history that does not carry pain for both of you, she said gently, but hiding from it will not make it disappear. If anything, the attack last week proves that others already suspect the truth, even without knowing the full details. Lyra rose slowly from her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the enormity of what she had just learned. Kale rose with her, pressing gently against her side, his quiet devotion the only steady thing in a moment that suddenly felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted entirely. I need time, she said quietly, to think about what this means. Of course, Draven said, though something in his voice suggested he wanted to say far more, if only he could find the right words to say it. Lyra left the study with Kale close beside her, walking slowly through the quiet corridors of the stronghold, her mind spinning with the weight of everything she had just learned. Her mother had spent her entire life running from this truth, hiding Lyra away in a small cabin at the edge of the woods, choosing poverty and isolation over the danger of being found by the family that had destroyed everything she once had. And now Lyra stood at the center of that very danger, connected by blood to a tragedy that had shaped the entire pack she had once been invisible within, tied by something far more complicated than fear, to the very man whose family had caused it all. That evening, as the sun set over the stronghold walls, Lyra sat alone in her chamber, staring out at the darkening sky, Kale resting quietly beside her. She thought of her mother's warnings, spoken so many times throughout her childhood, warnings she had never fully understood until now. Never trust the wolves of this pack. She understood now, with painful clarity, exactly what her mother had meant. And yet, as she glanced down at Kale, who had risked his own life to protect her without hesitation, and thought of Draven's quiet honesty in the study earlier that day, she found herself caught in a painful, complicated space between the history that connected them and the fragile trust that had somehow begun to grow despite it. She did not yet know which truth would win out in the end, but she understood, with a certainty that settled deep into her chest, that whatever choice she made next would shape not only her own future, but the future of the entire pack, watching, waiting, and wondering what would come of the poor girl, whose bloodline had returned to challenge everything they thought they understood about their history. News of Lyra's true bloodline did not stay contained within the stronghold walls for long. Within days, whispers turned into open conversation, and open conversation turned into something far more dangerous. A pack, slowly dividing itself into two opposing camps, each with very different ideas about what her existence meant for their future. Lyra felt the shift everywhere she went. Some servants now treated her with a cautious, uncertain respect, bowing their heads slightly when she passed, as though unsure whether she deserved the gesture, but unwilling to risk disrespecting her if she did. Others grew colder, more distant, clearly uncomfortable with the idea that the throne they had always accepted as rightfully Draven's might carry a more complicated history than they once believed. "They're choosing sides," Mother Yarrow explained one afternoon, watching from the window as a group of warriors argued heatedly in the training yard below. "Some believe the throne should remain exactly as it is, regardless of what happened 30 years ago. Others believe the truth changes everything, that the bloodline was stolen and should be restored." "I never asked for any of this," Lyra said quietly. "I don't want a throne. I don't want a war fought over my name." "I believe you," Mother Yarrow said gently. "But belief and reality do not always align, especially when powerful people see opportunity in chaos." That opportunity, it seemed, had already found its way into Rurik's hands. Over the following days, Lyra began hearing reports of private meetings held between Rurik and several disgruntled nobles, quiet conversations that stopped abruptly whenever loyal guards approached. Draven grew increasingly tense, torn between his duty to investigate his own beta and his reluctance to believe that someone he had trusted for years could be working against him. "He's building support," Draven admitted one evening, pacing the length of his private study while Lyra sat quietly nearby, Kale resting between them. "Framing your presence here as proof that I've grown weak, that I've allowed a threat to remain within our walls out of some misplaced sentiment." "Is that what this is?" Lyra asked carefully. "Misplaced sentiment?" Draven stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. "No," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "It isn't." The admission settled between them, heavier than either of them seemed prepared to fully address. Lyra looked away first, her thoughts too tangled with fear and uncertainty to focus on whatever was slowly growing between them. "What happens if Rurik succeeds in turning enough of the pack against you?" she asked instead. "Then he will likely challenge my right to rule," Draven said grimly. "Pack law allows any qualified wolf to contest leadership if enough support exists to justify the challenge. If he believes he has enough backing, he will use it. And if he wins?" Draven's expression darkened. "Then everything changes. For this pack, and for you." The following morning, Lyra's fears were confirmed in the worst possible way. She woke to the sound of raised voices echoing through the stronghold, and by the time she reached the great hall with Kale at her side, she found Rurik standing before a gathered crowd of warriors and nobles, his expression set with grim determination. "For years I have served this pack loyally," Rurik declared, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "I have watched our alpha lead with strength and wisdom, until now. Now, he shelters a girl whose bloodline once tried to tear this very throne apart, and he does so not out of strategy, but out of misplaced affection that clouds his judgment." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in clear disagreement. Lyra felt her stomach twist with dread as she realized exactly what was unfolding in front of her. "I do not say this lightly," Rurik continued, "but I believe our alpha's judgment has been compromised." By pack law, I formally challenge his right to lead, and I call upon this hall to witness my claim." The hall erupted into a mixture of shocked gasps and murmured agreement. Draven, who had entered moments after Lyra, stood tall and unflinching at the sound of the challenge, though Lyra could see the tension coiled tightly in his shoulders. "You would tear this pack apart over a personal grievance," Draven said, his voice calm despite the storm building around him. "I would save this pack," Rurik countered, from a leader too distracted to see the danger sitting quietly within his own walls. The two men stared each other down across the hall, the weight of history and loyalty and fear hanging heavily in the space between them. Lyra felt Kale press protectively against her side, sensing the danger building around them, though there was little even he could do to stop what had already been set into motion. "By pack law," Draven finally said, his voice hard and resolute, "your challenge is accepted. We will settle this, the way our laws demand, before the eyes of this entire pack." Rurik's expression flickered with something close to satisfaction, quickly hidden behind a mask of solemn duty. "Then it is settled. 3 days from now, at sunrise, we will determine who truly deserves to lead this pack." As the hall slowly emptied, tense conversations rippling through the departing crowd, Lyra remained rooted in place, her heart pounding with fear for what the coming days would bring. Draven approached her slowly, his expression carefully composed despite the obvious weight of what had just occurred. "This is my fault," Lyra said quietly. "If I hadn't come here, if Kale hadn't—" "Stop," Draven interrupted gently. "This is not your fault. Rurik has wanted more power for a long time. Your arrival simply gave him the excuse he needed to finally act on it." "What happens if you lose?" Lyra asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Draven's expression grew serious, though he did not look away from her. "Then Rurik becomes alpha, and everything I have tried to protect, including you, falls under his control instead." The weight of those words settled heavily over Lyra, the reality of the coming days pressing down on her chest like a physical force. She thought of everything that had happened since Kale first bowed before her in the square, the bloodline she had never asked for, the history that connected her to this pack, in ways she was still struggling to understand, and the dangerous position she now occupied at the very center of a conflict that could reshape the pack's entire future. Kale nudged her hand gently, drawing her attention back to the present moment, his golden eyes steady and reassuring, despite the uncertainty surrounding them. "Whatever happens in 3 days," Lyra said quietly, more to herself than to Draven, "I won't just stand by and watch." Draven studied her carefully, something like respect flickering behind his tired eyes. "I would not expect you to," he said, "not anymore." Outside the stronghold walls, word of the challenge spread quickly through the pack, dividing loyalties further with each passing hour. Some prepared to support their alpha, trusting his years of steady leadership over Rurik's sudden, opportunistic claim. Others, swayed by fear and old grievances, began quietly aligning themselves with Rurik instead, hoping his challenge would restore what they believed had been lost decades ago. And at the center of it all stood Lyra, once invisible, now impossible to ignore, preparing herself for a confrontation that would determine not only the future of the pack, but her own place within it. The 3 days leading up to the challenge passed in a blur of tense preparation. Lyra spent much of that time with Mother Yarrow, learning everything she could about pack law, about the traditions surrounding a formal challenge, and about the delicate balance of power that had kept Blackthorn territory stable for so many years. "The challenge itself is straightforward," Mother Yarrow explained during one of their sessions. "A contest of strength and skill, witnessed by the pack, determining who possesses the right to lead. But the true battle happening right now is not the one that will unfold at sunrise in 3 days. It is the battle for loyalty happening in every corner of this stronghold." "Can Draven win?" Lyra asked. "He is strong," Mother Yarrow said carefully. "Skilled, experienced, and respected by many. But Rurik has spent years building relationships within the ranks, and he has used the last several days wisely, turning uncertainty into doubt, and doubt into support." Lyra thought of the frightened attackers from weeks earlier, of Rurik's carefully guarded expression the night of the attack, of the quiet meetings held behind closed doors. She had no proof, nothing concrete enough to bring before the pack, but her instincts told her clearly that Rurik's ambitions ran far deeper than simple concern for the pack's safety. On the morning of the second day, Mother Yarrow approached her with an unexpected offer. "If you wish," the old woman said carefully, "I could begin teaching you some basic defensive skills. Not enough to make you a warrior in 3 days, but enough to protect yourself if the situation grows more dangerous before this is resolved." Lyra hesitated only briefly before agreeing. She had spent her entire life feeling powerless, invisible, at the mercy of circumstances far beyond her control. If there was even a small chance to change that, even in a limited way, she intended to take it. Over the following 2 days, Mother Yarrow taught her simple techniques for balance, for redirecting an opponent's strength rather than matching it directly, for staying calm and focused even when fear threatened to overwhelm her. Kale, still healing from his earlier wound but recovering well, watched every practice session closely, occasionally offering quiet encouragement through soft, approving sounds whenever Lyra successfully executed a technique. By the evening before the challenge, Lyra felt marginally more prepared, though the deep uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring never fully left her chest. She found Draven alone in the training yard that night, practicing quietly under the moonlight, his movements precise and controlled despite the obvious exhaustion visible in his posture. "You should be resting," she said, stepping into the yard. "So should you," Draven replied without pausing his movements. "I couldn't sleep," Lyra admitted, moving closer. "Too much on my mind." Draven finally stopped, lowering his blade and turning to face her fully. In the pale moonlight, his usually composed expression looked tired, vulnerable, in a way Lyra had not seen from him before. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Draven admitted, surprising her with his honesty. "Not of Rurik's skill in combat. I have faced him in training many times, and I know I can match him. I am afraid of what happens if he succeeds in turning enough of the pack against me, before we even reach the challenge itself. Strength alone cannot fix a divided loyalty." Lyra stepped closer, uncertain of what to say, but wanting, more than anything, to offer him some measure of comfort in return for everything he had risked to protect her over the past several weeks. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "you're not facing it alone." Draven studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes. "Neither are you," he said softly. "Whatever the outcome, I intend to make certain of that." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the coming day settling around them like a shared burden neither of them could fully carry alone. Kale, resting nearby, watched the two of them with quiet, steady patience, as though sensing that whatever bond had grown between them over the past weeks would soon be tested in ways neither of them could fully predict. When morning finally arrived, the entire pack gathered in the wide, open training grounds outside the stronghold, forming a large circle around the space where the challenge would take place. Lyra stood near the front of the crowd, Kale pressed protectively against her side, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Draven and Rurik entered the circle from opposite sides, both dressed simply for combat, both carrying the weight of the pack's uncertain future on their shoulders. Mother Yarrow stood at the center, serving as the formal witness required by pack law, her expression solemn as she addressed the gathered crowd. "This challenge will be settled through combat, witnessed fairly by this entire pack," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the silent grounds. "Whoever emerges victorious will hold the right to lead, as decided by our ancient laws." The two combatants faced each other across the circle, the tension between them thick enough to feel in the cold morning air. Lyra watched, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, as the challenge finally began. The fight was fierce from the very first exchange, both men skilled and determined, neither willing to concede ground easily. Draven fought with controlled precision, each movement calculated and efficient, while Rurik relied on raw aggression, pressing forward with relentless force that gradually began to wear against Draven's careful defense. Lyra watched with growing dread as the fight stretched on, the crowd around her murmuring nervously with each exchange of blows. She could see the exhaustion beginning to show in Draven's movements, the toll of sleepless nights and mounting stress finally catching up to him, in a moment that demanded everything he had left to give. Rurik pressed his advantage aggressively, driving Draven back toward the edge of the circle, and for one terrifying moment, Lyra feared the challenge might end in a way that would change everything she had come to hope for over the past several weeks. But then, drawing on some reserve of strength Lyra had not fully anticipated, Draven shifted his stance, redirecting Rurik's next attack with the same technique Mother Yarrow had recently taught Lyra herself, turning his opponent's own momentum against him. Rurik stumbled, off balance for just a moment, and Draven seized the opportunity, ending the exchange decisively with a final, controlled strike that left Rurik defeated on the ground before him. The crowd fell into stunned silence, followed quickly by a rising wave of relieved, approving murmurs. Draven stood over his defeated opponent, breathing heavily, his expression grim but resolute. "This challenge is settled," Mother Yarrow declared firmly, stepping forward to formally end the contest. "Draven Ashgrave retains his right to lead this pack." Rurik, defeated and exposed, was quickly restrained by loyal guards, his earlier confidence replaced by bitter resignation, as the truth of his ambitions became clear to the entire watching pack. Lyra released a breath she had not realized she was holding, relief flooding through her chest so intensely that her legs nearly gave out beneath her. Kale let out a triumphant sound beside her, pressing gently against her side in quiet celebration. Draven's eyes found hers across the circle, and for a long, breathless moment, the two of them simply stared at each other, the weight of everything they had endured together finally beginning to lift. Whatever challenges still remained ahead for the pack, for Lyra's uncertain place within it, this particular battle had finally reached its end, and for the first time in what felt like a very long while, Lyra allowed herself to believe that the future ahead might hold something better than fear. In the days following the challenge, the stronghold slowly began to heal from the tension that had gripped it for weeks. Rurik, stripped of his position as Beta, was formally exiled from Blackthorn territory, his ambitions ultimately costing him everything he had once worked to build. The nobles who had quietly supported his rebellion found themselves facing careful scrutiny, though Draven, true to the fairness Lyra had come to admire in him, chose understanding over punishment wherever possible, offering second chances to those willing to accept them honestly. Lyra found herself, for the first time since arriving at the stronghold, able to walk through its halls without the constant weight of fear pressing down on her chest. Servants greeted her with genuine warmth now, no longer uncertain about how to treat the girl whose bloodline had once seemed like nothing more than a dangerous mystery. Even Isolde, though still reserved, offered a stiff but respectful nod whenever their paths crossed, a small but meaningful shift from their earlier tension. One quiet afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the challenge, Draven found Lyra sitting in the stronghold gardens, Kale resting peacefully beside her in the warm autumn sunlight. He approached slowly, settling onto the bench beside her without a word, content simply to sit in comfortable silence for a while before finally speaking. "I've been thinking," he said eventually, "about what happens next." "For the pack?" Lyra asked. "For you," Draven clarified. "For us." Lyra turned to look at him fully, her heart quickening slightly at the quiet vulnerability in his voice. "What do you mean?" Draven took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Your bloodline carries a legitimate claim to leadership within this pack, one that history tried to erase but could not fully succeed in doing. I have spent the last several weeks trying to decide what that means, not just for the future of Blackthorn territory, but for the two of us personally." "And what have you decided?" Lyra asked quietly. "That I do not want to simply hold onto a throne built on the destruction of your family," Draven said, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was proposing. "I want to build something new, something that honors both our histories, instead of erasing one to protect the other." Lyra's breath caught in her chest. "What are you saying?" Draven turned to face her fully, his golden eyes soft with an emotion she had slowly watched grow between them over the past several weeks. "I am saying that I would like you to rule beside me, not as a hidden secret or a political complication, but as an equal partner in leading this pack forward, if that is something you want as well." Kale lifted his head at that moment, watching the exchange with quiet, patient interest, as though he had known all along that this moment would eventually arrive. Lyra felt tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes, the weight of everything she had endured since that terrifying, unexpected day in the market square, finally settling into something she had never dared to hope for. The poor, invisible girl who had spent years being overlooked, mocked, and dismissed, now sat before the Alpha King, being offered a place not just within his pack, but at his side, as an equal. "I never wanted a throne," she said softly. "I never wanted any of this." "I know," Draven said gently, "but sometimes the things we never wanted end up becoming exactly what we needed, if we're willing to accept them." Lyra studied him carefully, searching for any trace of hesitation or doubt, and found only quiet, steady certainty in return. She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed everything to protect her from this very history, and wondered, with a bittersweet ache in her chest, whether she would have approved of the path her daughter now stood ready to walk. Perhaps, Lyra thought, her mother had not been trying to protect her from this future entirely. Perhaps she had simply been trying to give her the chance to face it on her own terms, when she was ready, rather than being thrust into it unprepared. "Yes," Lyra finally said, her voice steady, despite the emotion swelling in her chest. "I'll rule beside you." Draven's expression softened into something close to relief, followed quickly by a rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious features into something warmer, more open than Lyra had ever seen from him before. Word of their decision spread quickly through the pack in the days that followed, met with a mixture of surprise and cautious optimism. A formal ceremony was announced, one that would mark not only Lyra's acceptance into the pack, but her rise alongside Draven as Alpha Queen, a title once thought lost to history, now restored through circumstances no one could have predicted. On the day of the ceremony, the entire pack gathered once more in the same open grounds where the earlier challenge had taken place, though the atmosphere this time carried none of the tension and fear from before. Lyra stood at the center of the circle, dressed simply but elegantly, Kale standing proudly beside her, fully healed and radiant with quiet devotion. Draven stepped forward, taking her hand in front of the entire gathered pack, his expression solemn with the weight of the moment, yet unmistakably filled with genuine happiness. "Many of you knew this girl once, as nothing more than a quiet, overlooked presence at the edges of our territory," Draven announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. "Today, I ask you to know her instead, as Lyra Ashgrave, rightful heir to a bloodline our history once tried to erase, and my equal partner in leading this pack forward, together." A wave of quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd, followed slowly by a rising chorus of approving voices, until finally, one by one, the gathered pack began to kneel, honoring the new Alpha Queen standing before them. Lyra felt tears slipping freely down her cheeks, as she watched the pack that had once mocked and dismissed her, now bow in genuine respect, completing a transformation she never could have imagined possible on that terrifying day in the market square weeks earlier. Kale pressed gently against her side, his loyalty finally rewarded with the recognition it had always instinctively known she deserved, long before anyone else had understood the truth of who she truly was. As the ceremony came to a close, and the pack slowly began to disperse into quiet celebration, Draven turned to Lyra, his expression soft with quiet affection. "How does it feel?" he asked gently. Lyra looked out over the pack that had once been strangers to her, now bound together with her through history, struggle, and hard-won trust, and felt a warmth settle deep within her chest that she had never expected to experience in her life. "It feels," she said softly, "like coming home." Burrito was cold, drawing her hand gently into his own, and together, with Kale faithfully at their side, they turned to face the future of a pack rebuilt not on fear and force, but on truth, loyalty, and the quiet, unshakable strength of a girl the world had once overlooked, but would never overlook again.